Good evening and welcome to Watchmen on the Wall. Tonight we tackle an issue that directly usurps the God-given authority of parents over their own children. The South African government is planning to make it illegal for parents to spank their children. Social Development Minister Bathabile Dlamini revealed recently that her department intended proposing legislation to address parental corporal punishment. In a newspaper interview I conducted with the independent group, I said a ban would be a recipe for disaster in a country that lacked discipline in all sectors of society, from government to schools. Discipline is at an all-time low in South Africa. Education appears to be lurching from one crisis to the next because of a dire lack of discipline amongst not only pupils but teachers as well. Legal experts said South Africa was legally bound to ban corporal punishment in homes by virtue of being a signatory to several conventions which consider it violence against children. Apparently, the South African government has signed several conventions at the United Nations that fundamentally conflict with the values of the majority of its citizens. I told the media that Family Policy Institute would vehemently oppose this legislation. Government has a role to play to protect vulnerable children, but that does not mean imposing its will on the rights of parental authority over children. Government interference in the relationship between children and parents will lead to increased social problems. While we are aware that there are many cases of domestic abuse in South Africa, particularly child abuse, government must address that abuse without driving a wedge between parents and their own children. Even if government's intentions are honourable, criminalising parents for rightly disciplining their own children is a recipe for disaster. Agnes Miller, an official in the department's child directorate, said it did not have a position on corporal punishment yet, but was in the process of drafting a discussion document bringing together legal, medical, religious, psychological and psychiatric opinion on the issue. Workshops and consultations with all sectors would also take place, she said. Christian citizens must speak into this issue, and Watchmen on the Wall will keep you informed and updated about the progress of this bill. Pearl Coupe, my anchor, spoke to the Department of Social Development's Director of Communication, Ms. Lumka Oliphant, in Pretoria, to understand the reasoning behind this legislation. We will show you the full interview in the next segments, so stay tuned. After that, I chat to Pastor Bongani of Glory Manifest Church in Cape Town, who will help us understand the broader implications to society if this proposed legislation becomes law in South Africa. I also continue my chat with historian, missionary and author Dr. Peter Hammond as we further deconstruct the myths about the church in history. But before we do all that, here's Jackie Giorgio with your weekly news roundup. Thank you, Jackie.
Thanks, Errol. Good evening and welcome to your Global Christian News Roundup. In breaking news tonight, the Leprosy Mission launched its first ever emergency appeal in response to the food crisis in West Africa. The charity warns that the region is facing a full-scale humanitarian crisis, with people leaving their homes in search of food and water. It is said that those affected by leprosy are most at risk in the West African nation of Niger, where the charity currently funds treatment services at a local hospital. The 2012 food crisis has been triggered by a poor harvest, which caused food prices to rocket. We are appealing to viewers to please pray for God's provision for that nation and for the lepers. To help or donate funds towards the lepers, please see the Leprosy Mission website. As unrest continues to rage in the Middle Eastern country of Syria, Christians are pleading for international prayer and intervention as their plight is buried under a mountain of news propaganda. Despite reports by the secular media implying that the majority of Syrian citizens want regime change and President Bashir Assad out of power, most Syrian nationals are ambivalent on the issue. The reality is that in every Arab nation that has seen a regime change thus far, including Egypt and Libya, radical Muslim governments have replaced secular dictatorships, and we have seen a spike in Christian persecution. Assist News Network reports that to date in Syria, some 138,000 Christians have fled the area of Homs, where believers have been terrorized and had their churches and properties looted and occupied by rebels. Please pray for the Christians in that country and for the spiritual warfare taking place there. If the Syrian government is overthrown by radical forces, it will destabilize the entire region and specifically threaten the security of the State of Israel. Moving on to global Christian trends now, a recent online study has found a marked increase in the number of worldly Christians, particularly in Western nations. Many of the participants in the online survey have confessed to being Christians in name only, with just 1 in 3 respondents saying they regularly live out the teachings of Jesus. The anonymous self-assessment test, run by a leading religion institute in the USA, asked Christians 40 questions to determine how they would act out their faith in real-life dilemmas. And statistics show that the numbers in the worldly Christian category have risen dramatically from 23% to 30% in the last 6 months alone. Crossing the globe to Indonesia now, church growth is exploding with an unprecedented level of people coming to Christ. Persecution against Christian churches in that area is still rampant, however, and recently local authorities ordered the demolition of 20 churches in the region of Sumatra. Still, in other parts of the country, Pentecostal churches are seeing phenomenal growth, with Buddhists and Muslims starting to attend Christian services. In one church, Pastor Billy in Jotahardo has seen tremendous growth, with his congregation increasing from 400 to 6,000 members in just 4 years. Earlier this month, a Buddhist monk diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and only 6 months to live attended a service at the church, seeking prayer and healing after hearing of the many miracles that have already taken place in that congregation. After experiencing the power of God, the man returned to the monastery and testified to his fellow monks. He has since been excommunicated from their faith, but is seeking to join Pastor Billy's church. Finally, positive news from Brazil, where more than 1 million evangelical Christians participated in the annual March for Jesus in Sao Paulo, Brazil last month. Each year, hundreds of Protestant churches and non-denominational groups take part in the march, which was organized by the Reborn in Christ Church and included religious music shows and messages from pastors. Brazil's evangelical population is exploding every year, jumping from 6.6% to 22% of the overall Brazilian population, according to a recent census. This means that evangelical Christianity is the fastest growing religious segment in Brazil. The census results from the Brazilian Institute of Geography and Statistics shows that the evangelical population of Brazil increased by 16 million people over the 10-year period from 2000 to 2010 to an all-time precedent of 42.3 million. And that's a wrap from Watchmen on the Wall News. Stay tuned for more after the break.
Hello, we're standing on the fan walk here in Cape Town, and we want to just grab a couple of people as they come by to ask them what they think about this proposed legislation to outlaw spanking in the home.
Yes, I agree with that.
Why do you agree with that?
I think there's a culture, a global culture, that's where people move away from physical violence, and I mean, corporal punishment's already been removed from schools, so to get it out of the domestic environment is going to be, I think it's a positive step.
Do you agree with that?
No, I don't.
Why not?
Because I was spanked when I was growing up.
Did that harm you?
It didn't. It made me stronger.
I'm not against giving your naughty child a spanking. I don't think it does any harm.
I'm what I am because I was spanked by my parents. If they didn't spank me, I couldn't be what I am now. You know?
Each and every home or each and every mom has got their own rules, but in my opinion,
You won't agree with that legislation?
no.
I don't think that the state should get involved when it comes to disciplining a child.
Well, every parents have a right how they want to raise their children, but me as personally as a teacher, I wouldn't encourage it at all.
I can understand that they would want to get rid of child abuse and everything, but I do think that it's up to the parents' discretion what happens in the home, and often, like, you can discipline a child better.
So you don't believe they should be interfering in the...
No, I don't. I really don't, because it's my child. I make the rules and all that. That's my house. It's not the government's house.
What do you think would happen if government does outlaw spanking in the home?
The children will do whatever they like because they know that they won't be punished by their parents. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think that the discipline will become even worse.
Prevents parents from being able to parent in an effective way. I mean, spare the rod, spoil the child. That's biblical and it's thousands of years old. Surely if it didn't work, something would have changed.
Yeah. Comments on outlawing spanking in the home proposed by the Department of Social Development. After this break, Pearl Coupe will be interviewing Lumka Olifant of the Department of Social Development. Stay tuned.
Welcome to our Watchmen on the Wall viewers, and today we are discussing that theme that is in the headlines, and we're talking about the discipline of children. We are looking at the aspect that government is now looking to have discussions around how we discipline our children and dealing with the issue of spanking children and corporate punishment. And today with me in the studio, I have with me the Chief Director from the Department of Social Development. Her name is Lumka Oliphant. Lumka, welcome to our discussion today.
Thank you for having us, Paul, on Watchmen on the Wall.
The first question I'd like to ask you, Lumka, is dealing with the history behind the disciplining of children and corporal punishment. Help us to understand the department's reasoning behind this proposed legislation to outlaw spanking or corporal punishment of children by their own parents.
We have to acknowledge that South Africa comes from a very violent history. And this is, some may argue, this is one of the contributing factors that we are unable to find alternative forms of discipline for our children. So we're trying to address now and go and start the process of undoing all that history of violence, and some of these proposed legislation aims to address our violent past.
Thank you for giving us the history behind this decision by government to discuss the issue of children and discipline. But won't government be intruding on the legitimate authority of parents to discipline their own children as they see fit?
The Children's Act was developed to always to act in the interest of the child. So if parents are found not to be acting in the interest of the child, it is the duty of the state to take up issues of children in order for them to be protected. And that is why this proposed discussion is now put in the public for discussion.
Now, there is a distinct difference between child abuse and parental discipline. Help us understand these distinctions and talk to us in a way that the viewers as well may be able to better understand the distinctions.
The department has also spoken to children in child participation programs. The children themselves recognize the need for them to be disciplined, but most of them do acknowledge that parents sometimes hurt them when they are instilling discipline. And we are coming from a mind that says whenever a parent is disciplining their child, they are always in the right frame of mind. But in most cases, in some cases, it is not so.
Lumka, you keep talking about the state or the government doing what's in the best interest of the child. Now, what would you say to those who would say that spanking actually is in the best interest of the child?
The Children's Act was developed to always act in the interest of the child. So the department always has to look whether the discipline that the parent gives to a child is in the interest of the child. And we have to emphasize in the interest of the child.
Look, at the beginning of the program, you talked about the fact that South Africa is signatory to various United Nations conventions, as well as some regional and continental conventions. And South Africa essentially is making an attempt to align itself with some of these conventions. What would you say to South Africa making this attempt to align itself to conventions that the public itself may not necessarily agree with?
I think it is very important to note that there's no policy, there's no bill, there's no legislation on the issue. The department has had public discussions to amend the Children's Act. Now we are in the process of drafting the bill, which will be up for public hearings, and we are encouraging South Africans to please participate in the public hearings so that we can hear their voices and make the right decision in the interest of our children.
Let me ask you, Lumka, if the South African public, as you have invited them to participate in this process and have had discussions, now, if the South African public were to reject this proposed legislation, would government still implement it because of its obligations to the United Nations? And if so, what would one say about South Africa's national sovereignty and the right of the South African electorate to determine their own value system?
The state then will have to take a policy decision that firstly must protect the children and have to be in the interest of the child.
I would like to once again thank our lovely guest, Lumka Oliphant, for coming and talking to the Watchmen on the Wall viewers. Lumka, thank you very much on behalf of Watchmen on the Wall. Thank you for coming and participating in this discussion.
Thank you for inviting us to be part of the discussion.
There you have it. We've had a very interesting conversation with Lumka Oliphant, who happens to be the Chief Director from the Department of Social Development. And we'd like to encourage all our viewers there, you've heard it from Lumka herself, that they very much want the public to participate in this process. And the legislation after the drafting of the bill is going to be up for public hearings. So we would like to encourage you to be as involved as much as possible and make sure that you comment on the proposed legislation.
Welcome back. In the studio with us this evening, we have Pastor Bongani Mgai of Glory Manifest Church in Cape Town. Pastor Bongani is also a pro-family advocate and is here to talk to us about the implications of the outlawing of spanking bill. Pastor Bongani, thank you for joining us in the studio. And just tell me, you've seen in the media that the Department of Social Development is proposing legislation to outlaw spanking in the home. What is your views on that, and what do you believe is the implications of imposing legislation like that in South Africa?
Firstly, I think, well, the government and the leaders in our country, and definitely the Department of Social Services, is trying to make society a better place. I suppose that we have to give them that.
So you think the intentions are noble?
I think the intentions are noble. We all agree. I think this is where we all agree. Things are not the way they should be in families, in society. And I think also I must congratulate them on this, at least, that they are coming to the understanding which we have always had, that the family is the building block, is the foundation of everything.
That's right.
So at least that's the good foundation. However, I think in their attempts or in their eagerness to try to come up with solutions to make a society a better place, I think maybe they might have gone a bit off, and maybe
overboard.
We can, maybe a bit overboard. And maybe this is where we can all now come together and work with them to try to channel and to come up with better programs or initiatives to make society a better place.
The department's reasoning behind this bill is that there is child abuse. Children are being abused in homes by parents and sometimes people close to them. Do you think outlawing discipline, to use a better word, discipline in the home, will deal with this problem of eradicating child abuse?
Well, there are many channels they can use to deal with the abuse. I mean, there are laws in place. There are various laws in place. The police have tools at their hand which they can use to deal with the abuse. There are numbers that children can call. There are programs and campaigns on TV, adverts, and so on and so forth that can deal with the abuse. So I don't think this is correct to link this with having to deal with abuse.
So spanking cannot be linked to abuse?
No, I don't think there's a link there. I don't think there's a link there. They are just being, it's zealousness, it's overexcitement. There are already things in place to deal with the abuse. And I think...
there's laws in our country.
There are many laws in our country in place with that.
Child abuse, so...
There are already programs on TV that deal with this, with the awareness. At schools, programs are being done. We know that with parents as well. We know churches as well are doing work with this, trying to create awareness with children, how to identify this. We know Sunday school teachers are also aware of this. They are looking out for the kind of signs that need to be there if a child is being abused. So are teachers at school. So are people in society, So there are many, many interventions already in place to deal with child abuse. This is unnecessary to deal with that.
And if you think about it, there are laws that outlaws child abuse, but child abuse still happens. So I think the thinking is that if we have laws outlawing spanking or any kind of corporal punishment by parents on their children, that somehow you're going to deal with the issue of child abuse.
Yeah, my feeling also is the same, that the laws are there, the things have been put in place. What is needed now is maybe policing, is maybe the right structures to support the law, to implement, to execute what needs to be done.
You think more enforcement of the law?
That's what needs to happen.
Rather than more laws?
Yes, that's what needs to happen. We can't just have another legislation throwing it, into the whole mix of legislation there is. I think what is simply needed is to use what already is there. It's world class, it's good, what is already there in place.
What do you think the implications is going to be of government's intrusion into the family, being a pro-family advocate?
Now that's the main problem that I foresee in this, in everything. As much as we admire and we commend them for the enthusiasm they're showing and the revelation they're finally having that the family is the foundation block, and that everything needs to be built on it. But what is going to happen now with government? This anti-spanking, movement, eventually, wanting to make it a legislation or law, is bad, because one of the things it's going to do, it disempowers parents. Because if you are a parent...
And you don't want to do that.
You don't want to do that. It disempowers parent, because now you are stripping from parents a tool which they can use to deal with a situation at home. Every parent who has a child should be able to assess the situation and be able to look at their child. Every child is different. I have many children, and we don't treat them all the same. So this could be another tool that the parent could have used to deal with disciplining a child. And now you are disempowering that parent from being able to use this as a tool. Second thing, psychologically, what you're going to do now to a parent is that a parent is going to feel hopeless in all the complexity that they have to deal with, and with all the challenges thrown in by society and TV and all the things our children have access to, and social media and radio and so on and so forth, a parent is going to become so disempowered that now they don't know how to parent anymore. They might as well then give up and say, well, I'm not going to do anything because I can't do anything, I can't discipline my children. So that's one of the things. The second thing, the problem that I would have, maybe on a greater corporate level, is that the government is almost becoming a surrogate family or a surrogate parent. That it is now standing in the place of what a parent is supposed to do.
And that's a recipe for disaster.
That's a recipe for disaster. Number one, you could send the wrong message to parents that they don't have to be responsible for their own children.
Government will do the job for you.
Already teachers are complaining in schools that the work would be much better for teachers if parents at home would do their part. So now if you're introducing such a law, government is now once again in the territory of parents. And it's a surrogate family, and it is now almost taking away from what a parent should be doing. The parent should be at liberty to look at their family as a father that I am, and as a wife, and as a mother and a father, that they are able to look at the family and they are able to manage their family in a way that is right. And we know that is a responsibility the Bible, entrusts with the parents. That's a responsibility that's solidly and squarely in the lap of a parent, of a mother and a father, and not in the responsibility of rulers and authorities and government.
Scriptures that come to mind is, do not spare the rod and spoil the child, and the parent is supposed to drive the foolishness out of a child with the rod. And always talks about the rod, not using the hand for discipline. But this is government telling Christian parents as well that you don't have this right and responsibility that essentially comes from God, and that we want to take over. What do you think the response of Christian parents should be in South Africa to this bill?
Look, I think if you are a Christian and if you are a parent, you certainly need to stand up. And this is a mandate that we have been given by our Father in heaven, by God. This is a mandate we have, that if we've brought children into this world, that we have the responsibility to nurture them, to teach them the ways that they should go, so that when they are old, they know what they need to do. This is our responsibility. We cannot allow government or whoever, whatever intentions they have, yes, the intention might be good behind this, but still, it is still the wrong thing to do. We need to stand up and to say, this is our responsibility. Leave the managing other things and being elected officials and all of those things and government programs, that is your responsibility. our responsibility is to be parents and to parent our children. And the other thing about this is, as parents, we need to stand up. Our children need us. They need our guidance.
That's right.
Our children are faced with too many choices. Our children are distracted. There are too many things, from music, from culture, from all the things that are going on in society. Peer pressure at school, teachers teaching them all the things and throwing all the...
So what we need is more parenting.
What we need is more parenting.
Not less.
We need, as parents, to give our children clear guidelines.
That's right.
To be strict in terms of telling them how to live. We've seen all this. We've seen all the cycles. We've been through a lot of things. We know better than them. We need to now be parents and provide guidance to our children, to tell them what they do. They might not like us. We are not here to be liked, to be popular. But years down the line, our children will love us for that we provided the right and the correct guidelines for them.
Pastor Bongani, Mgai, thank you for coming into the studio and sharing your great wisdom with us. We'll be right back after this break.
Well, welcome back to our viewers, and we have our special segment again today where we begin to showcase ordinary people doing extraordinary things. And I am so pleased and privileged to be able to welcome back Justine Demmer, who is from the National Freedom Network. And we are so happy to have you back. Welcome back, Justine.
Thank you very much.
And last time you were here, we had a wonderful discussion, which I'm happy we can continue with, around, trafficking and your work and involvement in trafficking. And I hope today we can get a better understanding and talk a little bit more about what your network does. I'd like you to maybe take us through a typical intervention, a rescue intervention. What happens when you hear, or the people that are involved in trafficking? What is the typical scenario?
The scenarios can be quite bleak. And I think that I have to just start off by saying that is really why the church is involved. Because we are called to set the captives free.
Yes.
And to be there for those that really do get taken out in this world. That's and we are there to bring the love of Christ to them.
Yes.
So in an intervention like that, we don't replace the professionals.
Yeah.
Raids are done on those traffickers by the police, by special services, but we work alongside them. And in this country, it's fantastic that they allow us to work alongside them to bring that caring element, that loving element, to bring that gap. That's often lacking. So the investigators will go in, the police will do the raids, and they'll bring those trafficking victims out. Then we'll have our network partners on hand to immediately start engaging with those victims. Because
now when the police come in, how do you get involved? How do you know? Do you have a relationship where they inform you?
We have a very good relationship in most provinces, and we're developing that relationship as we go. They don't have to work with us, they choose to, because they also see it's in the best interest of the victim.
Yes.
Because very often when they come out, they are severely traumatized. They've been told that the police are their enemy, that they're going to go to jail if they get caught. They have been beaten, they have been tortured. Very often they have been repeatedly raped, very often starved, and most importantly they've been put onto drugs because it keeps them easy to handle. Very often after a few years the girl will start coming back of her own account because she needs the drugs so badly.
So a lot of them then are actually going through drug withdrawal.
Drug withdrawal.
Which I'm told can be very traumatic in itself.
Incredibly traumatic. They are hungry very often. They don't know what's going on. They're very confused. And what they need is a personal connection. And the investigators have their hands full with the perpetrators. And it's us to come alongside them. And what we do is very often we have a particular person who's our coordinator in a province who will go with them then through to the police stations, do the statements. We're trying to set up emergency homes in every province so that the girls don't actually even have to go to the police station, but they can come to a house where they can be interviewed, they can have a shower and a bath, and we can help them from there to get into another safe house. All of these are run by Christians.
Safe,
Yeah, feel safe. And these are run by Christian places. They're Christian people who've said, I want to do something. And very often it's people who the love of God is compelling them, because why else would you want to get involved in this? It's just so horrific. But something in them compels them God in them compels them to step forward and say, well, I'll take them in.
And
I'll start a safe house.
Are these volunteers? These are people who are
These are all people who have never probably been involved in any kind of social work before. Very often they've never been in any kind of law enforcement before, but they had a heart to help.
Just volunteering their services.
Volunteering their services, started something, became available, and now have set themselves up as proper NGOs. They have registered with DSD. They have gotten in professionals to help.
Yeah.
And they keep drawing the community in and in and in to come and assist with the situation.
I would imagine that a lot of these people who come in to help, a lot of them don't even maybe necessarily have qualifications.
No.
But just the heart and the desire.
The heart
and
and
I'm
the
saying
desire.
this because, you know, maybe some of the viewers out there have a
Yes.
heart to really want to help, and they're thinking, well, I don't have a PhD in counseling, and, you know, I don't have this
Yes.
background. So
very few of our network have any kind of formal training. But it doesn't take formal training to love, to
That's
care.
right.
It doesn't take formal training to do awareness, to let people know, look out for trafficking in your community, for churches to say, what's going on about us? Where can we see it happening? What can we do to stop it? Who can we phone? For people to man a phone line, you know, and give the information through.
Right.
There's so much that the Christians are doing all around the country.
Absolutely.
And we're just trying to coordinate that and draw them in more and more into those coalitions.
Let me ask you, I'm thinking of a scenario whereby you have a church or a ministry out there who says, you know, we'd really love to get involved in this. We'd love to support this. Does your network provide training? Would you be able, for instance, to go out there and do a Train the Trainer program where you could go to ministries or several ministries and help train them in this area
We
of
do.
providing relief and
We
support?
really do. And we've actually already got to the point where we have resources and materials ready to give to communities, to give to churches that explain exactly what trafficking is, how to keep people safe, how to keep your daughters and your sons safe, how to identify them and what to do. All they need to do is facilitate the viewing of those, facilitate people understanding, facilitate and distribute. You know, they don't even need to be experts in the field to be able to do it. And we're having the Salvation Army, actually, is holding a conference to educate churches on how to become aware about human trafficking and what to do.
Wow.
In PE, for anyone, any church, I think, that wants to come is welcome so that they can learn and develop in helping. And they're on board. The Catholic Church is on board. We've got so many amazing churches. His people just did a whole conference on human trafficking.
Wow.
And slowly but surely, every church that I'm coming into contact with is saying to me, yes. I want to know, we want to protect our people, we want to catch these guys, what can we do? Whereas before, to be honest, a few years ago, there was that apathy. There was that kind of, well, what is human trafficking and what's it got to do with us? All of a sudden, churches are starting to say, well, I should actually be caring for my community. I should be looking after not just my own kids, but what about the kids down the street?
Yes, and that's so encouraging because quite often you don't hear of these stories.
Yes.
You know, you don't see Christians being portrayed as people who are actually out there and helping and sharing the love of Christ. So it's wonderful to see that.
Karen Sandenberg, who runs, she just is a lady, a mother and a grandmother, went into a school recently and did a talk on trafficking, just a very simple one. She had a group of 5 young girls come to her afterwards saying, you know what, we've had this guy come and approach us, he wants to take us away to go shopping in Joburg. And we think we're going to be trafficked, and thank you so much for coming to talk to us.
That's wonderful. We have, unfortunately, again, run out of time. Just leave us with your details, contact details, that number, if anybody wants to, you know, get involved. What is that number again?
0800-555-999.
What?
You can leave tips. You can, if you're a traffic victim, you can phone us, or if you want to get involved, give us a call and they'll pass your details on to us.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much again, Justine, for coming in for the second time. And to our viewers, you've heard it here, and we encourage you to do your Christian duty, be a role model, and get involved. We'll be right back after this short break.
Welcome back to our segment on deconstructing the myths of Christianity. In the studio with us for the second week, we have Dr. Peter Hammond. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you, Errol.
And we're going to be talking about some of the myths in Christianity that the politically correct regime are pushing out there. But there's some different facts that Peter has, and he's going to share those facts with us tonight. Peter has written 2 books, one on the Crusades and another one entitled Answering the Skeptics. These books are available at Christian Liberty Books, and I encourage you to get these books to help you understand the background of Christianity and its history. Peter, we want to continue this discussion we had last week and talk more about, we've spoken about the Crusades. Now we want to go a little bit into the Spanish Inquisition. There's a lot of misinformation that's been spread about that particular time in history. But you have some facts that perhaps can help us give a deeper understanding.
Anybody who's been trying to love their neighbor and share the gospel with somebody will have had this kind of reaction. But what about the Crusades? And what about the Inquisition? And these are general purpose clubs used to bludgeon Christians, to intimidate Christians. And I've been subject to all kinds of tirades on occasion when we weren't even dealing with the subject. But if we can just know our history, then we won't be intimidated and have the rug pulled from under us. And we can answer quite logically.
I tend to agree with you there, because even when I was interviewed on radio, on television, we're talking about prostitution, we're talking about homosexuality and the special rights of homosexuality that would bring up the Crusades, the fact that Christians are violent, that Christians are taking away the rights of other people, when in fact the freest nations, the most advanced nations in the world is where the gospel penetrated the deepest. So I do agree with you there, but give us a little bit more insight into the Spanish Inquisition and what actually happened. What was the purpose for that, and who was on the receiving end of that?
Well, first of all, we need to understand that Spain was colonized by Islamic jihadists for 800 years. So for 8 centuries, Spain was a colony of the Muslims, and it was a caliphate. And at that time, the Christians were put under such severe persecution, and many of them were enslaved and massacred, so that when they were liberating Spain in what they called the Reconquista, they brought about the Inquisition in order to be able to free the church from the heresies of those people who had lapsed, who had been traitors, who had betrayed their brethren, and so on. So this was part of their logic. But today many people think that the Inquisition is responsible for having been a bunch of Christian intolerant fundamentalists burning at the stake some poor witches who were minding their own business, and, you know, Wiccans and earth-loving characters. And so the general picture is the Inquisition is showing the church when it's intolerant and vicious and mean and cruel. But actually, the opposite is true. If you study the court records of the Inquisition, you find out that the people who ran the Inquisition weren't Christians, and the victims weren't pagans. In fact,
were they?
It was the opposite. The Inquisition happened at a time when the church was horribly corrupted, and you could buy any position, bishoprics, all the way up to cardinals and popes even, for money.
So when you refer to the church, you're talking about the Roman Catholic Church.
This is before the Reformation. This is hundreds of years before the Reformation.
Yes,
so there was no Protestant church. There's just the Roman Catholic Church in those parts of Europe. And they had been subverted and basically hijacked by pagans. And you know this, if you study church history, you can see it was hideous what was going on. The victims of the Inquisition were actually Protestant believers, Bible-believing evangelicals, people like the Waldensians, the pre-reformers, or the Lollards. These were the field workers of the Reformation. If you study the court records, you find out that what they were normally being inquisited about was, do you believe that you can go directly to God through Jesus Christ without going through the church or through Mary or the saints? Do you believe that you should be able to read the Bible in your own language? Do you think that you can say the Mass in your own language and not in Latin? And people were burned at the stake for translating the Bible into English or any other language. William Tyndale was burned at the stake for the crime of translating the Bible into the English language. And Tyndale's martyrdom was just one of the many victims of the Inquisition. You can think of Lady Jane Grey. She refused to renounce a Protestant faith. They beheaded her. Time and again you can see that, in fact, the Inquisition was far from being Christians persecuting non-Christians. It was actually when non-Christians had hijacked the church, they were persecuting the real Bible-believing evangelical Christians. So Christians were not party to the Inquisition except as the victims. And you can see that.
But we just got to define what you mean by Christians. When we talk Christians, we're saying Bible-believing Christians, born-again, Spirit-filled Christians that believe in the Bible as God's infallible word.
Oh, yes.
So, and when we talk about the persecutors in the time of the Inquisition, you say these are people that hijacked the church. So they weren't followers of Christ and believers of the Bible.
Not really, because many of them would contemptuously toss the Bible of the victim into the fire to be burned at the stake with the victim. These weren't Bible-believing people. These were people who hated the Bible. Many people would be surprised to hear that the Bible was forbidden in 12 1229, in the Council of Valencia, the Bible was placed on an index of forbidden books. Basically, the Bible was banned by the church. And one of the things that John Wycliffe was, and this was rescinded in 1962 during the Second Vatican Council, Roman Catholic laity were forbidden from reading the Bible between 1229 and 1962. And so the Protestant reformers were trying to get the Bible into the local languages, into German, into English, into Italian and French, and they were being persecuted for it. So most of the victims of the Inquisition were Protestant, Bible-believing evangelicals, like the Waldensians, like the Lollards. The Dutch Christians, 18,000 Dutch Protestants were murdered by the Inquisition in the 1500s, just for the crime of not believing in the Roman Catholic hierarchy.
So the facts then are that Christians, true Christians, were the victims of the Spanish Inquisition, not the perpetrators. That's what
correct.
You're telling us.
Now, obviously the church has never been perfect, but its whole record needs to be evaluated, and the good far outweighs the bad. Now, even Jesus Christ had his Judas, but you can't take Judas and make him the example of all of the 12. He was the exception. He was the treacherous traitor, and there have been Judases in church history. And the Inquisition is an example of the Judases. But just as Jesus has his Judas, the church has had its Inquisition. But the victims of the Inquisition were those who really loved the Lord and who were being true to the Bible.
Which is still happening today. Those who love the Lord, follow his word, are being the people persecuted. Those who violate God's word or compromise it are the people being lauded and applauded in the media.
Indeed, you can go even further and say that today the Inquisition is being done by secular humanist media and intellectuals in universities that will persecute people who believe in intelligent design and question evolutionary theories of origins, or people who may say, we stand for the traditional view of marriages between one man, one woman for life, and next thing they find themselves guilty of intolerance.
Hate speech.
And they are being basically persecuted by a modern-day Inquisition, which is using a media and even sometimes legal means,
that's
just
a great
like
analogy.
the Inquisition did.
That's a great analogy.
So in a sense, today the Inquisition's back and Christians are the victims again.
Absolutely. Dr. Peter Hammond, thank you for this wonderful insight on the Crusades, on the Inquisition. I know there's a lot more we can talk about. We've run out of time, but we've got to get you back to Watchmen on the Wall to complete this series in deconstructing the myths of Christianity. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Government's proposed legislation to ban corporal punishment in the home is a direct assault on the sanctity of the family. Society is only as strong as the family. The family is also God's idea. It is the first and most fundamental unit of society. As a result, government's intrusion in the family unit, for whatever reason, can never produce positive results, especially if that government struggles with discipline issues of its own. Parents are commanded by God to raise their children in the ways of the Lord. The scripture also warns parents about sparing the rod and spoiling the child. Loving but firm parental discipline has never harmed a child. However, the lack of discipline not only harms children, but causes all of society great distress. Dr. Arnold Mall from Pretoria sent me an article entitled, "Spanking Does Not Harm." In it he writes, "In recent times, much has been written in the media about the harmful effects of parents spanking their children. The argument is that it teaches children to use violence as a way to solve their problems. That is degrading, to inflict pain on a child, etc. I hope to show that the very opposite is true. At the heart of all criminality, and that includes the use of violence, is a lack of respect for authority. Spanking, if done in the right manner, Arnold says, teaches a child of an early age to respect those in authority and is more likely to produce well-adjusted adults. It is the responsibility of parents to shape the lives and behaviors of their children. Put simplistically, this is achieved by creating pleasant consequences for acceptable behavior and unpleasant consequences for unacceptable behavior. In other words, discipline is only one aspect of child rearing. Spanking is only one form of discipline, and when applied correctly, will lead to very little corporal punishment. The research trying to link spanking in childhood with a disposition for violence in adulthood is inconclusive. One of the problems is that research methodology does not distinguish between the correct kind of spanking and the wrong kind. Whenever a parent hits a child because he is angry, it's retribution, not discipline. The parent wants to make the child pay for his misdemeanor. That approach will never lead to improved behavior, but teaches the child that violence is a way to deal with anger and frustration. Whenever a parent lashes out at a child, out of the blue because the child made a mistake or broke something or kept the parent waiting or whatever, it creates terrible insecurity in the mind of the child. Such punishment, and we will not call it discipline, will in the long term have very negative effects on the child. Spanking applied in the correct manner teaches a child from an early age to respect authority and will serve as a strong deterrent against criminality in later years. Ask any teacher about the lack of respect school pupils display these days now that spanking has been forbidden. Spanking in this manner leaves no scars. However, yelling at a child in anger or making derogatory remarks or ridiculing the child leaves lifelong scars on the inside that cannot be healed. Yet there is no law against that. The experience of parents who have disciplined their children in the correct manner have shown that children have turned out to be well-adjusted and successful citizens. Wise words indeed from Dr. Mall. Discipline administered by loving and responsible parents never harmed a child. Government's proposed legislation must therefore be opposed. Outlawing spanking in the home will also not eradicate child abuse. People who abuse little children are not doing it to discipline them. They are violent and troubled individuals who must be prosecuted for their heinous crimes. Although there are laws against child abuse, that crime persists in our nation. Sexual abuse against children is also a rising scourge in South Africa. Many perpetrators, like the Sunday rapists, admit to being addicted to pornography. However, government has done nothing to outlaw pornography on the internet and on TV. Criminalizing all parents for doing what God has commanded them to do is not only an assault on the sovereignty of the family, but also an attack on the rights of parents to raise their own children according to their beliefs and value system. And that's my summary. Please make sure you visit our website at www.familypolicyinstitute.com. Please join me next week here on TBN Africa for another edition of Watchmen on the Wall. God bless you, and remember to keep standing. Good night.